welcome all of you to our Wednesday's Word from the Word on this beautiful day in southern Indiana. It's sure nice to enjoy a February like this, and so all of you that are in the South, eat your heart out because we have just as warm of weather as you have, I think. But anyway, I said that for my daughter's benefit as much as anybody, so. Down in Georgia, they're not having quite the temperatures that we're having, well, for them, they're not. So anyway, happy Valentine's Day to all of you, and to all of you that are watching online as well. We're glad that you've joined us, and we're going to continue our study on jawbreakers from James. We've already dealt with a couple of the jawbreakers, and he's going to continue to break our jaws as he slugs away at us to help us become the kind of believers that God wants us to be. And so this morning we're still looking at James chapter 1. And as soon as I get my notes open, we will start looking at that together. James chapter 1. And our focus today is going to be on verses 12 through 15. Now, I've entitled this differently than what you've got on your notes, because I'm notorious for changing my mind on that title. And so anyway, my title, similar to what you've got, but it says this: God is not your problem. Okay, that's my title. Now that's for my benefit. So you could use whichever title you prefer as we look at James chapter 1, verses 12 through 15. And let's while we're waiting on a couple more people to arrive, let me just share with you that we need to continue to pray for Barb Matlock. If you got the email this morning by way of a prayer request, they did lose Craig, which was anticipated once they turned off the life support on him. So just pray for Barb and pray for Teresa and Missy in particular. I don't know if she still goes by Missy, or if I'm aging myself, it may be Melissa now, but nonetheless, pray for all of the family as they work through some things together, and they will be having a private service for the family, but they're not sure when that's even going to be able to happen yet, because he was an organ donor, and so that's one of the reasons they ended up keeping him on life support longer than anticipated as well. So just be in prayer for them, and we thank the Lord for the good report on Hugh Doherty. The pain that he was having, I didn't know because it was a quick text message from Nancy, but the pain that he was having was in his hip, and he couldn't walk. And so they ended up going to the doctor, got a cortisone shot, which helped some, but he went then to the orthopedic surgeon the next day, and they said if the cortisone shot doesn't work, then they will go ahead and pursue hip replacement surgery. So anyway, good answer to prayer in regards to that, because I pictured it being possibly worse than what it was. So all right, let's take our Bibles and turn to James chapter 1, verses 12 through 15. James chapter 1, verses 12 through 15. Follow along with me as I read our text for us today. We read this in James chapter 1, beginning with verse 12. Blessed is the man who endures temptation. Now let me just say something here. I'm going to interrupt myself, because throughout the book of James, particularly in the first chapter, you'll see the word trials and temptation used a lot. Sometimes it's the same Greek word that is used and translated differently. So I want to make sure I clarify for you today when to know that it's not temptation, but it's trial that is appropriately used. But it says this: blessed is the man who endures temptation or trials here. For when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then, when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. I remember writing a paper in seminary related to this particular topic, and I was basing it off of the teaching from the Sermon on the Mount, and where the Lord taught the people to pray. And one of the things that was said when he taught them to pray was this: and lead us not into what? Temptation. And I thought, well, that's a little troublesome, because my understanding is that God doesn't lead us into temptation. And so we'll talk about that in just a few moments. But it's important that we understand what is being said here when we talk about this subject of temptation. There's a reason that I've entitled this, God is not your problem, because God gets the blame for a lot of the difficulties that we go through. It was the playwright Oscar Wilde who jokingly remarked this: I can resist everything except temptation. A good word there from him. A fellow by the name of Tucker Max, I found this on the internet, don't have a clue who he is. But he said this: the devil doesn't come dressed in a red cape and pointy horns. He comes as everything you've ever wished for. Isn't that right? A good deduction on his part. So what we need to understand is this, based upon what the Bible teaches: temptation will visit everyone, most likely every day of your life. Just know that. It comes in many forms and so forth, but it will visit us, and we will struggle with that. We can change the name or the details, but temptation has been around from the very beginning of time when God created Adam and Eve. And it's a story we've all heard, and it's the same for us as it was for Adam and Eve. It's the same for us as it was for Cain. The same for us as it was for Moses or for Abraham or for Job. And I could go on and list probably everyone who was a very important person listed in the scriptures. Temptation is very real to us, and Satan tempts us the very same way he tempted Jesus in Matthew 4 in the wilderness. So the bad news is this: you will be tempted, and you will probably be tempted every day. The good news is this: 1 Corinthians 10:13 tells us that we're not given any trial that we are not able to overcome, because God has made a way of escape. That's the Marvin translation. All right? Now, we can understand that in light of the word temptation. And we'll explain this a little bit more later as well. But the word temptation is something that takes place in the midst of trials that we face. So understand those two words can be used in the same sentence, replacing one another, and we'll understand that in just a moment. The battle is waged for the souls of men and women, and it has touched all of us at some time. Most of these spiritual battles, temptations that we face, are waged in secret. Would you agree with that? We face them usually when nobody else is around. Or maybe as we make our decisions on our temptations when nobody else is around. And most of the battles that we face on a day-by-day basis aren't what we would consider enormous battles. They may seem small, they may even seem a little bit significant, but we don't consider them to be life-changing. Give you some examples of what I'm talking about. You may get angry at something, or you may choose not to get angry. You may eat a snack, and it's okay today, okay? Everybody has our blessing today to eat a Valentine cookie, all right? But as a general rule, you may eat a snack or you could choose not to, depending on your given situation and what's best for you. You can break your resolution not to buy on credit. Or you could choose to go ahead and make that purchase. Here's what you need to realize. And no, here's what we do realize, I should say. We often make decisions based upon the fact that no one will see us, right? We make the choice to exercise or not to exercise. Nobody's going to know. We make the choice to buy on credit or not. No one's going to know. No one will know if we lied to someone about this particular matter. You see, here's what we need to understand as we talk about this very important matter of temptation. We've already learned from James that we will face trials. He says, when you face trials, count it all joy. That itself is a jawbreaker. Well, here's another jawbreaker. We will face temptation. And here's the thing that we need to remember about it. God has ordained your spiritual progress and my spiritual progress to be measured by the daily trials that nobody else tends to know about. So trials and temptation can bring growth in us depending on what choices we make when no one else is looking. So how can we fight and win the battle against the temptations that we face on a day-by-day basis? Well, that's where verses 12 through 15 give us the answer for that. And let me just go ahead and reread that for us because it's so important for us to understand. Blessed is the man who endures temptation. When he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. That's the key right there. Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. How do we keep his commandments? Well, first of all, we got to know them. So one of the things we need to do is make sure that we're in the study of his word on a regular basis so we know what he is teaching us. And then we've got to make the hard choices on a day-by-day basis to act upon what we know. That's wisdom as we talked about it before. When we act upon what we know, then we operate wisely. Then verse 13, let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. By the way, was Jesus tempted in the wilderness? Yeah, a temptation was placed before him, but in reality, he was not tempted because he did not give up that part of his divinity. He was without sin, the Bible tells us. So he was tempted, but not tempted. Hopefully that makes sense to you what I'm saying. Verse 14, but each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. Now, as we look at our passage today, we're going to see three things in there related to temptations, okay? We're going to talk about how temptation begins, how temptation grows, and how temptation ends. I've got different words for those, but that's just in brief detail what we're going to be talking about. Let's look first of all at how temptation commences. 4 facts on temptation that I want to share with you this morning. Verse 13, let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. Now here's what I want us to understand. When we face the temptation, it's easy to blame God for our problems. You see, we live in a world of discontentment. We always have something wrong. And frankly, we can expect that on an earth that is cursed because of sin. But the problem is the way we deal with it is we want to put God at the forefront. It's interesting. We turn to God when we have problems that we can't handle or can't control. We blame God when we face problems that we may be able to control to some degree. We hear people say regularly, God, why did you do this to me? Or, Lord, why did you let me give in to that Valentine's Day cookie? Or whatever the case may be, you know what I'm saying? And Lord, why can't I make the same money that others make? Then I would be happy. Well, we learned better than that last Sunday, didn't we? So it's easy for us to blame God for our problems that we face. The second thing I want to emphasize with temptation when it comes our way is this: God is never the source of temptation. He is never the source of temptation. Here's what I mean by that you need to understand. God will never set you up to fail. That's the key emphasis as I say that to you today. He doesn't tempt people to do wrong. The word tempt means to entice, to allure somebody, to try and get them to do something evil in the cases of temptation. That is never from God. God is never the source of temptation. Let me give you a third thing about temptation when it comes our way. God will never lead you into doing evil. Now let me go back to Matthew 5, where where the Lord's Prayer is given, and Jesus taught them how to pray, and he said, and do not lead us into temptation. What is emphasized there is this. A better way of understanding that would be this way: temptation, but that he would not allow us to be led into a temptation that we can't handle with his help and on our own. So that's the emphasis there. God will never lead you into doing anything evil. And then a fourth part of how temptation commences is this: what God means for good, Satan means for evil. In other words, here's where we can see those two words used interchangeably. God allows trials into our life. Satan will turn those trials into temptations. Okay? God means that trial to produce what he wants to in terms of our character, to become more and more like Jesus Christ. Satan will twist that trial so that it becomes a temptation for that believer to do something evil, to turn away from God. And there's a multitude of ways that he does that. But the point that we need to understand is that God sends a trial, Satan turns it into a temptation. For example, a terrible sickness comes upon a believer. Could that sickness be a testing from God? Absolutely. The temptation to blame God or to question God or anything along that line. And here's what we need to understand. Any event in our life can either be a trial or a temptation, or it can be a combination of the two. God's meaning it for good. Satan intends to turn it into something evil by making it a temptation. All right? So many good things can come through a sickness in a believer. But here, let's look at the flip side of it. I don't know if I got this on there. No, I don't. I'll wait there. Does Satan work through sickness? Yeah, he does. Through that same sickness, Satan will tempt you to get angry, often angry at God. He may tempt you to get bitter. He may tempt you to become desperate and in despair. And while God has that good purpose in mind, Satan can use it to destroy you if you let him. And that's where we've got to make sure that we understand how God works in this. Somebody loses their job and they wonder, could that be from God? Answer, yeah. It could be. God could have a great purpose in mind for something that seems negative. The key is to respond to him properly. He may have a better job, absolutely, because then you get confident in yourself. You start trusting in yourself. And all of a sudden, God's not in the picture anymore. And God's saying, okay, I want to test you here. How are you going to respond to this good thing that happens to you? Are you going to remain humble, or are you going to become proud? Are you going to remain trusting in me, or are you going to start trusting in yourself, or trusting in your money, or whatever the case may be? Does it make you more generous? Does it make you more loving? Does it make you more sensitive to the needs of others? It could, or it could make you greedy and selfish. Here's what we need to understand, again, just to re-emphasize this to us. The same event can be both a trial and a temptation based upon its source. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. I made this up just from examples of people that I've known for many years of ministry in the past. A man goes on a business trip. He checks into an expensive hotel and he's by himself. So he eats at an extravagant restaurant rather than the type of restaurant he would normally eat in, because the company is going to foot the bill. The company is paying, and he orders more than he would at a normal meal if he were paying for it by him, having said no. But here's the other side of it. Is it a temptation from Satan? Probably also yes. It's a temptation to selfishly lust. And it could be a lust for food that he doesn't normally get to eat. It could be a lust for what he's going to be watching on TV or on internet. All of those things. Satan takes what God allows and he will whisper this in your ear. It's okay. No one will know. You getting the gist of what I'm talking about this morning, what James is trying to tell us here? All right, let's go to number 2. And I got to get this done in pretty short order here. Number 2, how it compounds. Okay, I'm using alliteration here. How it grows. If we're familiar with compound interest, you know what we're talking about there. How it grows. And that's what's going on here in verses 14 and 15. Look at what it says. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. Now, I want you to notice 4 things about these 2 verses here as well. One is this. I want you to notice the definiteness of temptation. Here's what it says in verse 14. Each person is tempted. Each person is tempted. Remember the hymn we have sung on occasion, more so in the past than in the present, "Come thou fount of every blessing." Then looks to fish. Bill, do you take sticks of dynamite with you and then light them and toss them into the water, and then you will use your net to catch the fish as they're blown out of the water? If it would work, I understand. No, we don't fish that way. What we do is this. We put something on the line, at the end of the line that we put down into the water, and we know that those fish are hiding down in the seaweed area or under rocks or something like that. And what we put on the end of the line has to be enticing to a hungry fish, or they're not going to worry about going after it. And so they're going to be watching the movement of it. They're going to look at it. It's going to, you got to feed them at lunchtime too, or at breakfast, whatever the case may be. But you got to get them while they're hungry. But then you've got to lure them over. You've got to entice them, as it says. Draw them away from where they are. Because in the case of temptation, the temptation to sin offers a satisfaction to us, just like a lure would offer a satisfaction to a fish. And sin always looks good, and that's why we're enticed by it. That's why we're drawn to it. We can always justify our wrong actions, but we still need to recognize when they are wrong. So a second thing about temptation is the draw of it. The third, evil desires. Give you an example of what I'm talking about. I've known people in the past, evil desires. Give you an example of what I'm talking about. I've known people in the past who have dealt with alcohol abuse. And when I say that, they have an addiction to alcohol. And it's so hard for them to get away from that. Can I be completely honest with you this morning? That wouldn't entice me in the least. I would have no interest in it. And I'm going to be honest with you, apart from taking alcohol in a medication form of some sort, I've had no interest in alcohol. But that doesn't mean somebody else that I know doesn't have. And I worked with a guy several years ago in our church that was struggling with that. And I told him, whenever you go, we found out when was the trigger time as such for him. I said, whenever you face a temptation, you call me. And I said, I'll come and pick you up and bring you back to the house, and we'll do something together. We did. I remember one day, and we had a big field behind us, and it needed some clearing to be done. So I had him go out there with me and start clearing that field. I never expected this response from him, but he said, you know, I always wondered what a pastor did other than Sunday mornings. So I just clear a field for 6 days of the week and then preach on Sunday mornings. But anyway, that was just saying to us there, it will inevitably lead us into sin, and sin will inevitably destroy us. Now let me look at number 3, how temptation concludes. Verse 15, the last part, it says this: when sin is fully grown, it gives birth to death. Don't miss that. God says Satan comes to deceive and to destroy. That's what temptation is. A deceitful lure on the part of Satan with the intent of destroying us. And that's the way he works in our lives. You know, twice here, James uses the image of a birth. And, you know, what could be happier than a birth? You know, we enjoy it when we can plan for the birth of a new baby in our family. We may get decorations put together. We may plan for a party. We may pray for that new baby. We may save our money. The ladies get excited to see the sonograms. I didn't hear anything from the men there that you like it too, but we'll assume it's primarily ladies that love to see those pictures. We have baby showers. We have gender reveals. We send out these elaborate birth announcements to people. It's hard to find anything more beautiful than the birth of a baby, isn't it? But what James is saying to us here is this, and it's from in us. And as it grows, one day it will give birth to sin that will lead to death. And what I mean by death is this: eternal separation from God. That's what death is. Death is a separation of us from God. God can't even look upon sin. And so when we sin, we separate ourselves from God. The good news is this. John said this, and I'll close with this morning. He said, if any of you think you are without sin, you're deceiving yourself. And then he goes on and says this: if we confess our sin, he will faithfully forgive us of our sin, and cleanse us from all of our unrighteousness. So, in summary, let me just give us two challenges this morning. One is this: recognize every trial to have a temptation that coincides with it from Satan. With the trial, ask God how he wants you to respond to it, and respond accordingly. And you will grow, and you will become more and more like Christ, or you will give in to a temptation that Satan throws at you at that same time. Let's close with prayer. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the time that we've had to study it together this morning. And I pray that as we've learned from your word today, this morning, and I pray that as we've learned from your word today, that our hearts will be challenged